The ex-wife stayed calm through every insult, until the courtroom went silent. "You're leaving with nothing, Anna." Anthony sneered, his tailored suit shifting as he leaned across the mahogany defense table. "No alimony. No shares. Just the clothes on your back and whatever dignity you haven't already cried away." His attorney smirked, shuffling the ironclad prenup. Across the aisle, Carly let out a soft, mocking laugh. Anna Patel didn't flinch. She adjusted her cuffs, her expression an unreadable mask of perfect, chilling calm. She let the insults wash over her, waiting for the exact moment the courtroom would go dead silent. Silence, Anna Patel had long ago decided, was not an absence of sound. It was an active, breathing entity. It was the negative space around a terrible truth. And in the 3 months since Anthony Russell had locked her out of their glass-walled penthouse, silence had become her closest confidant. The rain lashed against the single pane of her rented studio apartment in the Garment District, a stark downgrade from the sweeping skyline views of Manhattan she had grown accustomed to over the last decade. She sat at a wobbly veneer table, nursing a cup of black tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The glow of her laptop screen illuminated the sharp, elegant planes of her face, casting long shadows against the peeling floral wallpaper. On the screen was a live feed of Anthony, her husband, her business partner, her betrayer, standing on a stage at the Tech Innovators Gala. "We built Russell Innovations on a foundation of aggressive forward momentum," Anthony was saying, his voice oozing the charismatic, magnetic charm that had first drawn Anna to him when they were hungry grad students. Beside him, clinging to his arm with the practiced elegance of a curated accessory, was Carly. Carly, the former head of their PR department. Carly, who was 24, ruthlessly ambitious, and currently wearing the sapphire tennis bracelet Anna's grandmother had left her. Anthony didn't just take her company, he took her history. When the divorce papers had arrived, delivered by a smirking courier while Anna was in the middle of a delicate code compilation, they had been a masterpiece of legal brutality. Anthony hadn't just filed for dissolution of marriage, he had executed a corporate coup. The prenup they had signed 10 years ago when they had nothing but debt and a shared dream stipulated that in the event of a fault-based divorce triggered by negligence or infidelity, the offending party forfeited their equity. Anthony had manufactured a paper trail, suggesting Anna, the lead architect of their predictive AI algorithm, had intentionally introduced vulnerabilities into the code, jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar defense contract. It was a lie so intricate, so beautifully constructed by Anthony's legal team, that it looked indisputable. He had framed her for corporate sabotage to trigger the fault clause, leaving her penniless. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have thrown the heavy crystal decanters in their penthouse, keyed his imported sports car, or wept into the arms of sympathetic friends. Anna did none of those things. When Anthony had confronted her, flanked by his silver-haired bulldog of a lawyer, Benjamin, Anna had simply read the documents, placed them neatly back on the glass coffee table, and packed a single suitcase. "You're taking this rather well," Anthony had mocked, pouring himself a scotch. "I expected a scene. I suppose deep down, you know you don't have the stomach for the big leagues, Anna. You're a backroom coder. I'm the visionary. I am taking it exactly as it needs to be taken, Anthony," she had replied, her voice smooth, betraying nothing of the tectonic plates fracturing inside her chest. Now, in the dim light of her studio, Anna traced the rim of her cold teacup. The psychological conflict raged behind her dark, placid eyes. There were nights when the betrayal threatened to swallow her whole, when the sheer, suffocating weight of his narcissism pressed down on her lungs. She had loved him. She had poured her genius into the foundation of his empire, content to let him stand in the spotlight while she managed the machinery in the dark. But grief, she realized, was an inefficient emotion. Anger, however, was a fuel source. She opened a heavily encrypted terminal on her laptop. Lines of green code cascaded down the black screen. Anthony thought he had locked her out of the mainframe. He thought he had severed her administrative access the moment the courier handed her the envelope. What Anthony failed to understand, what he had always failed to understand about his wife, was that Anna didn't just build the system, she was the system. She hadn't left a back door. She had left a ghost in the machine. "Enjoy the spotlight," Anthony, she whispered to the empty room, watching Carly kiss his cheek on the live stream. Because the stage is rigged. She typed a single, complex command line, executing a silent data extraction protocol she had buried deep within the company's subroutines years ago. It wouldn't crash the system, it wouldn't raise any alarms. It would simply listen. And record. She needed proof of the fabricated sabotage, and she knew exactly where Anthony's arrogance would force him to hide it. The psychological warfare had begun, but Anthony was fighting a ghost. And ghosts didn't bleed. They waited. Patrick O'Connor's office smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and desperation. It was located above a failing delicatessen in Queens, light years away from the polished mahogany and soaring glass partitions of Benjamin's elite corporate law firm. Patrick was 32, chronically sleep-deprived, and wore ties that looked like they had survived a minor war. He was also, despite his chaotic exterior, one of the most brilliant forensic financial lawyers Anna had ever researched. He didn't have the pedigree to impress Anthony, which was exactly why Anna had chosen him. Anthony would underestimate Patrick just as entirely as he had underestimated her. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mrs. Russell, sorry, Miss Patel," Patrick said, wiping a smear of mustard off a manila folder before opening it. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose, squinting at the dense stack of financial disclosures Anthony's team had dumped on them. "This is a massacre. Benjamin's firm, they don't just win cases, they obliterate the opposing party's will to live. They've buried us in 100,000 pages of discovery. It's a classic starvation tactic. They want to drain your non-existent legal fund until you settle for a bus ticket out of town." Anna sat perfectly still in the creaking leather chair opposite his desk. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, looking utterly out of place in the messy office, like a porcelain statue placed in a junkyard. "Let them send paper, Patrick." "Paper is flammable," Anna said, her tone conversational. "Have you looked at the routing numbers I sent you on the encrypted drive?" Patrick sighed, rubbing his temples. "I did. And Anna, I have to ask. How the hell did you get this? If this was obtained illegally, it's inadmissible, and Benjamin will have both of us disbarred. Assuming I don't get thrown in federal prison first." "It wasn't obtained illegally," Anna lied smoothly. Or rather, she compartmentalized the truth. "It's metadata. Anomalies in the algorithm server requests that I noticed before I was locked out. The algorithm processes global market trends, but there were secondary requests pinging an offshore server in the Caymans. I merely saved the logs." Patrick looked at her, searching her impassive face. "You're telling me your husband, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, is using his predictive AI not just to advise hedge funds, but to front-run the market and stash the profits offshore?" "I am telling you that Anthony is fundamentally greedy," Anna said. "He couldn't be satisfied with a legitimate billion-dollar valuation. He needed to prove he could outsmart the regulatory agencies. The sabotage he accused me of, it wasn't a bug. It was a smoke screen. He intentionally tanked the defense contract algorithm to create a massive write-down, allowing him to quietly funnel the undeclared capital into the Cayman accounts without triggering an SEC audit." Patrick leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. The sheer scale of the betrayal hung heavy in the cramped room. He framed his own wife for corporate espionage to cover up his embezzlement. "And to ensure I walked away with zero equity," Anna added, her voice dropping a fraction of a decibel. "It was efficient. Cruel, but efficient." "Anna," Patrick said softly, recognizing the deep, unhealed wound hiding beneath her calm exterior. "If we bring this to the judge without ironclad proof, Anthony will sue you for defamation. He will destroy whatever is left of your reputation. He has Carly testifying that she overheard you threatening to crash the system out of jealousy. He has his board of directors claiming you were erratic and unstable. Carly will testify to whatever Anthony tells her to," Anna said, visualizing the young woman's smug smile. "Carly thinks power is something you wear on your wrist. She doesn't understand that true power is invisible." She reached into her sleek leather tote and placed a black, thumb-sized USB drive on Patrick's desk. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. "What's this?" Patrick asked, eyeing it like it was a live grenade. "This is the architecture of his ruin," Anna said. "It contains the decryption keys for the Cayman accounts, cross-referenced with his personal biometric logins. He thought he was clever by hard-coding his retinal scans to the offshore transfers." Patrick's jaw went slack. "How?" "I built the security systems for his private server, Patrick. Did he really think I wouldn't leave a mirror?" The psychological toll of this revenge was a heavy cloak. Every line of code she had cracked to get this information felt like reading a diary of her husband's disdain for her. She had seen the expenses the luxury villas in Saint-Tropez bought under shell companies, the exorbitant jewelry receipts for Carly dating back 2 years before their separation. He had been planning her execution for years, smiling at her across the dinner table while digging her grave. "We don't use this yet," Anna instructed, her eyes locking onto Patrick's. "We let them play their game. We let Benjamin think he has us cornered. We let Anthony take the stand, under oath, and testify to his absolute financial transparency and my gross negligence. We let him build a house of cards so high the fall will shatter him." Patrick stared at the calm, terrifying woman sitting across from him. He suddenly felt a profound rush of pity, not for Anna, but for Anthony Russell. "You're a dangerous woman, Miss Patel." "I am a mathematician, Patrick. I just balance the equations." The conference room at Sterling, Vance, and Benjamin was designed to intimidate. Suspended 50 floors above the city, it featured wraparound floor-to-ceiling windows that made the occupants feel as though they were floating in the sky, completely untethered from the grounded realities of normal people. The table was a single, massive slab of polished obsidian. The air was conditioned to a crisp, uncomfortable chill. Anna sat at the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple charcoal turtleneck and tailored slacks, understated, professional, and entirely unbothered by the freezing temperature of the room. Beside her, Patrick looked like he was about to face a firing squad. He kept shuffling his meager stack of legal pads, hyper-aware of the expensive suits surrounding them. Across the obsidian expanse sat Anthony. He looked vibrant, aggressively healthy, a man feeding on his own perceived victory. He wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Patrick's car. To his right sat Benjamin, a lawyer whose reputation for courtroom ruthlessness was legendary. To Anthony's left sat Carly, acting as a corporate liaison for Russell Tech, though her presence was purely psychological warfare. She was there to rub salt in Anna's wounds, spinning a diamond ring on her right hand. "Let the record show it is 10 a.m., Tuesday the 14th, the stenographer muttered into her mask. Benjamin steepled his fingers, leaning forward. He had a soft, dangerous voice. "Miss Patel, we are here today to discuss the events leading up to your termination from Russell Tech, and the subsequent dissolution of your marriage to my client. Let's start with your mental state during the third quarter of last year. Would you characterize yourself as overwhelmed?" "Objection." "Vague," Patrick chimed in, though his voice lacked the booming resonance of the room. "I can answer," Anna said softly. She looked directly at Benjamin. "No. I was not overwhelmed. I was focused." "Focused," Benjamin echoed with a patronizing smile. "Focused on the defense contract algorithm? The same algorithm that mysteriously failed during the beta test with the Department of Defense, costing the company upwards of $200 million in projected revenue. I was focused on ensuring the integrity of the code," Anna replied, her voice an even, unhurried metronome. Anthony scoffed quietly, a sound designed to project pity. Carly leaned in and whispered something in his ear. Anthony smirked. "Miss Patel, we have sworn affidavits from 3 junior developers stating that you explicitly bypassed the QA protocols on the final compile," Benjamin continued, sliding a thick file across the table. "They claim you were erratic, hostile to feedback, and increasingly paranoid about your husband's relationship with Miss Carly here. Is it possible, Miss Patel, that in a fit of jealous rage, you sabotaged the company out of spite?" "Objection." "Badgering," Patrick said, sitting up straighter. Anna placed a hand on Patrick's arm, silencing him. She didn't look at the file. She looked at Anthony. He was watching her, waiting for the crack. He was waiting for the tears, the desperate denial, the hysterical breakdown that would validate his narrative of the crazy ex-wife. "It is not possible," Anna said calmly. "The evidence suggests otherwise," Benjamin pressed, sensing no resistance and therefore pushing harder. "My client offered you a generous severance, despite the fault clause. He offered you a dignified exit. Yet you sit here, wasting everyone's time, clinging to some delusional hope of a payout. You have no shares. You have no claim. The code logs show your terminal initiated the fatal error. Do you deny this?" "I do not deny that my terminal initiated the sequence," Anna said. Patrick shot her a panicked look. Benjamin's eyes lit up with predatory glee. Anthony leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Checkmate," his posture screamed. "Let the record reflect that the deponent admits her terminal initiated the sabotage," Benjamin said quickly. However, Anna continued, her voice cutting through Benjamin's triumph like a razor blade through silk, "A terminal is merely a physical access point. It does not dictate the operator." Benjamin frowned, a slight ripple in his otherwise impenetrable confidence. "Are you implying someone else used your terminal, Miss Patel? Because security footage shows you alone in the server room." "I am stating facts, Mr. Benjamin. Nothing more." Anna checked her watch. A cheap, unassuming leather-banded watch. "I believe we are done here for today." "We are done when I say we are done," Benjamin snapped, his veneer slipping. "No, Benjamin," Anthony interrupted, placing a hand on his lawyer's arm. He looked at Anna with a mixture of amusement and absolute disdain. "Let her go. If she wants to play the stoic martyr all the way to a public trial, let her. The judge is going to crucify her." Anthony stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked around the table, stopping just behind Anna's chair. He leaned down, his mouth inches from her ear. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot made her stomach turn, a ghost of a life she used to love. "You should have taken the severance, Anna," he whispered, low enough that the stenographer couldn't catch it. "Now I'm going to make sure you never work in this industry again. You are nothing without me." Anna didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes from an agonizingly close distance. "We will see each other in court, Anthony," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Make sure you wear your best suit." As she walked out of the glass room, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, Anna finally allowed herself a small, invisible smile. The trap was set. Now, she just had to wait for the courtroom doors to lock. The New York Botanical Garden in the dead of February was a desolate, freezing expanse of dormant life. The skeletal branches of the ancient oak trees clawed at a slate-gray sky, heavy with the threat of snow. The winding paths, usually choked with tourists in the spring, were entirely devoid of human presence. To the east, the magnificent glass architecture of the Enid A. Haupt Conservatory loomed like a frosted cage. It was a bleak, unforgiving landscape, and it was the perfect place for a conversation that officially did not exist. Anna Patel sat on an ornate wrought iron bench, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of a worn wool coat. Her breath plumed in the freezing air, a steady, rhythmic metronome of vapor that matched the calculating beat of her heart. She didn't shiver. She had spent the last 3 months conditioning herself to ignore discomfort. Today, she was waiting for the one variable her soon-to-be ex-husband had failed to properly eliminate. 10 minutes past the hour, a figure hurried down the pathway, boots crunching loudly against the frost-heaved gravel. The woman was bundled in a massive, olive-green puffer jacket and an oversized cashmere scarf that obscured half her face. Molly was 26, a brilliant but chronically anxious quality assurance lead. She had been with Russell Innovations since it was operating out of a cramped, poorly ventilated co-working space in Brooklyn. Back then, Molly had idolized Anna. She was the only other woman on the engineering floor who understood the sheer, elegant poetry of a perfectly optimized machine learning algorithm. Anna had mentored her, promoted her, and protected her from the aggressive, male-dominated culture Anthony often encouraged. Molly practically collapsed onto the far edge of the bench, maintaining a solid 3 feet of distance from Anna. She looked around frantically, as if proximity to Anna alone might trigger a subpoena from the bushes. I shouldn't be here, Anna, Molly whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting toward the empty conservatory in the distance. If Anthony finds out I even looked in your direction, he'll ruin me, you know he will. The NDA he made me sign when I left, it's ironclad. It has a non-disparagement clause with a $2 million penalty attached to it. I don't have $2 million, Anna. I don't even have $2,000 in savings. Anthony uses paper to build walls, Anna said, her voice a calm, anchoring weight against Molly's, frantic, kinetic energy. She didn't turn to look at the younger woman, keeping her gaze fixed on the frozen fountain ahead. But walls only work if you are afraid of what's on the other side. Look at me, Molly. Molly hesitated, a physical struggle warring within her, before she slowly turned her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, ringed with the dark, bruised shadows of prolonged insomnia. She looked like a ghost haunting her own body. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Anna. I wanted to warn you. I drafted a dozen encrypted emails. I really did. I know you did, Anna replied softly. The psychological conflict within Anna, the innate urge to comfort her former protege versus the absolute necessity of using her as a weapon, tugged at her conscience. She chose the latter. Empathy, while noble, wouldn't win a war of attrition. Tell me exactly what happened the night the beta test failed. Walk me through the timeline. Molly swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly in the quiet garden. It was 3 days before the Department of Defense demonstration. You were at the AI symposium in Chicago, delivering the keynote. I was running the final stress tests on the predictive modeling frameworks. The code was flawless, Anna. It was the most beautiful architecture we'd ever built. It was predicting kinetic variables with a 99.8% accuracy rate. But then, at exactly 11:42 p.m., the server logs showed an administrative override. From my terminal, Anna stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. But I was the only one on the engineering floor. The motion sensors confirmed it. I saw Anthony walk into your private office. He was in there for exactly 22 minutes. When he came out, he looked euphoric. Almost manic. An hour later, the system crashed. The defense algorithms inverted. They started predicting catastrophic failures, instead of tactical advantages, looping into a recursive death spiral. Anna nodded slowly, piecing the fragments together. The missing piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. And you pulled the internal surveillance footage. Molly nodded, a single tear finally escaping the barrier of her lashes and freezing against her pale cheek. I pulled the footage to see who was in your office, expecting to catch a rival corporate spy or a rogue contractor. But the footage for those 22 minutes was scrubbed. Replaced with a static, repeating loop of an empty chair. Only 3 people have the biometric administrative clearance to scrub the physical servers. You, the head of cybersecurity, and Anthony. So you took this anomaly to Anthony. I was stupid, Molly choked out, her voice breaking into a quiet sob. I thought it was a legitimate security breach. I thought I was saving the company. I took the anomaly log straight to his penthouse suite. He locked the door. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just smiled. He poured a drink and told me that my brother's private medical facility, the one his company's Platinum Health Plan was heavily subsidizing for his leukemia treatments, was exceptionally expensive. Anna felt a cold, sharp spike of absolute fury pierce her chest. It was a clean, purifying anger, hotter than the freezing wind, whipping around them, threatening a junior employee's terminally ill family member to cover his tracks. It was textbook Anthony, elegant, surgical, and entirely devoid of human empathy. He offered me a severance package masquerading as a promotion to a dummy shell company, provided I signed the NDA and signed an affidavit agreeing that I saw you acting erratically the week prior, Molly continued, wiping her nose with the back of her gloved hand. He told me if I didn't comply, he would not only fire me with cause, but he'd make sure I was blacklisted from every tech firm in the tri-state area. My brother needs that experimental treatment, Anna. I'm sorry. I needed the insurance. You did the right thing to protect your family, Molly, Anna said, her tone devoid of any judgment, offering the younger woman a profound, absolution-like grace. Survival is the primary human directive. I would have done the exact same thing in your position. But Anthony made a critical miscalculation. He assumed your silence was a permanent state of being. It has to be. Molly panicked, gripping the freezing iron edge of the bench. Anna, I can't testify in open court. He'll destroy my life. He'll pull the insurance funding. You don't need to testify to what he did, Anna said, calmly reaching into her sleek leather tote and pulling out a secondary, untraceable burner smartphone. She held it out to the terrified young woman. I need you to testify to what you did. As QA lead, it was your job to adhere to the protocols, I wrote. Protocol 4A requires you to maintain offline, encrypted backups of all anomaly logs on an air-gapped physical drive. Did you wipe the physical drive, Molly? Molly froze, her breath catching violently in her throat. She stared at the black phone in Anna's hand. Did you wipe the air-gapped drive? Anna repeated, her dark eyes locking onto Molly's with the terrifying intensity of a laser pinpointing a target. No, Molly whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. He didn't know about the physical backups. He's not a coder. He doesn't understand redundancy protocols or physical state saves. Exactly, Anna said, a chilling, triumphant smile finally gracing her lips, a predator sensing the trap closing. I need that drive, Molly. You don't have to break your NDA. You don't have to utter a single disparaging word about Anthony Russell. You just have to accidentally leave your gym bag at a coffee shop in Brooklyn tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Molly stared at the woman who had once been the quiet, unassuming shadow of Russell Innovations. She suddenly realized that the shadow was the only structural pillar holding the entire building up, and now, that pillar was choosing to walk away. Okay, Molly breathed, a fierce flicker of defiance, returning to her tired, haunted eyes. Okay. I'll drop the bag. The power imbalance between Anna and her ex-husband was not merely a legal hurdle, it was a physical, suffocating environment meticulously designed to break Anna's spirit and force a capitulation. Over the next 6 weeks, Benjamin's elite corporate law firm executed a masterclass in aggressive legal attrition. They were not fighting to win, they were fighting to bury her alive. They filed frivolous motions to compel discovery on offshore accounts Anna didn't even own. They sought to depose her elderly, ailing father in London, knowing the stress would severely impact his health. Worst of all, they successfully petitioned a sympathetic judge to freeze the meager joint savings account Anna had used to pay Patrick's retainer, claiming those specific funds were inexorably tied to the sabotaged company assets and were thus frozen under the pending litigation. Patrick's cramped office in Queens had devolved into a chaotic bunker of empty lo-mein takeout containers, stale coffee cups, and perilously stacked legal pads. He was fighting a brutal war of attrition with a rusted slingshot against a fully funded nuclear arsenal. They froze the checking account this morning, Patrick said one bleak Tuesday afternoon, tossing a heavy court order onto his desk in absolute disgust. He rubbed his eyes beneath his smudged glasses. You literally cannot buy groceries right now, Anna. It's a classic starvation siege. They are trying to squeeze the oxygen out of the room to force you to accept the $0 settlement before we even make it to opening statements. Let them think the siege is working, Anna said, calmly reviewing a dense, numerical printout of the Cayman offshore transfers she had decrypted the night before. The physical drive Molly had strategically lost in Brooklyn had been the Rosetta Stone Anna needed. It flawlessly linked Anthony's fabricated server crash to a massive series of offshore wire transfers. The timestamps of the system failure and the initiation of the wire transfers were exact down to the millisecond. Anthony had crashed his own company to hide a $300 million embezzlement scheme, washing the funds through dummy corporations while citing catastrophic software failure to the IRS. Anna, I'm working pro bono at this point, which is fine, but you need to eat, Patrick groaned, looking at her thinning frame. I can float you a loan. We can file an emergency injunction. I have enough cash hidden away to last until the trial, Anna lied smoothly. She had been eating exactly one meal a day for a month, usually plain rice and whatever vegetables were on clearance at the bodega below her apartment. File a motion begging the court for emergency living expenses. Make it sound utterly desperate. Cry poverty. I want Benjamin to walk into that courtroom next week firmly believing he is fighting a ghost who has already surrendered her sword. To maintain the elaborate illusion of her utter defeat, Anna forced herself to visibly exist in the luxurious spaces she used to inhabit, deliberately letting Anthony's social spies report back on her seemingly broken state. That Thursday, she walked into Le Petit Bijou, an aggressively expensive Upper East Side cafe famous for its $12 espressos and clientele of billionaires' wives. It was a place she used to frequent when she was still Mrs. Anthony Russell. She ordered a black coffee, paying with an assortment of crumpled, wrinkled bills, and sat at a small, isolated marble table in the corner. The plush velvet booths around her seemed to mock her unbranded, slightly worn wool sweater. She didn't have to wait long for the bait to be taken. The brass bell above the heavy glass door chimed, and the very atmosphere in the cafe shifted. Carly walked in, flanked by two friends who looked like genetic clones of her impeccably styled hair, dripping in understated designer logos, and armed with the arrogant, weaponized confidence of women who had never been told the word no. Carly spotted Anna immediately. A predatory gleam lit up her pale blue eyes. This was the social execution Carly craved, a chance to assert her dominance in the wild. She strutted over to Anna's table, the cloying scent of an expensive, custom-blended floral perfume aggressively invading Anna's breathing space. "Anna," Carly said, feigning a gasp of surprise, accompanied by a sweet, thoroughly lethal smile. "I didn't think they'd let you in here without an active platinum card. Are you lost?" Anna slowly looked up from her cold coffee, her face an unreadable, serene mask. "Hello, Carly. It's so incredibly brave of you to show your face in public," Carly continued, her voice projecting just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Her friends giggled softly behind her. "Anthony told me about the frozen accounts. It must be so hard, adjusting to this." She gestured vaguely and disdainfully at Anna's plain sweater and the scuffed toes of her boots. "If you need a payday loan for a decent lawyer, Anthony might be feeling generous. He pities you, you know. We both do. It's deeply sad to watch someone who just couldn't keep up with his genius spiral like this." Anna let the heavy insult hang in the air, refusing to react to the provocation. She didn't flush with anger. She didn't shrink into her chair or avert her eyes. She simply looked at Carly, her dark eyes evaluating the younger woman the way a master mechanic evaluates a fundamentally flawed, loudly grinding engine. "Tell me something, Carly," Anna said, her voice so low, so terrifyingly steady, that it forced Carly to lean in slightly to hear it over the hiss of the espresso machine. "When Anthony looks at you, does he look deeply at your eyes, or does he merely look at his own reflection bouncing off them?" Carly's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, confusion briefly replacing malice. "Excuse me? He bought you that sapphire tennis bracelet in November of last year," Anna stated calmly, gesturing slightly toward Carly's wrist. 3 months before he formally initiated the divorce proceedings. He told you it was a spontaneous gesture of his overwhelming love for you, didn't he? A token of a new beginning?" Carly crossed her arms tightly, suddenly defensive, her posture rigid. "What does it matter what he told me? He bought it, because he bought it at a private auction in Geneva," Anna continued, her tone conversational, almost bored by the revelation. "Using funds routed through a specific offshore shell company called Apex Ventures. He didn't buy it to woo you, Carly. He bought it as a tax-deductible asset depreciation write-off to hide capital gains. You aren't his partner. You aren't his great love. You are a line item on his ledger. To Anthony Russell, you are nothing more than a depreciating asset." The color rapidly drained from Carly's perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking sallow and sick. The name Apex Ventures clearly meant something to her, a slip of paper she'd likely seen on his desk and been told to ignore. Her friends stopped giggling instantly, glancing nervously at each other. "You're just jealous," Carly hissed, her voice losing its polished, melodic cadence, becoming shrill and defensive. "You're a bitter, washed-up, paranoid ex-wife who's about to get utterly destroyed in court. You have nothing." "I am many things, Carly," Anna said, elegantly picking up her coffee cup and taking a slow, deliberate sip. But I am not the one wearing a corporate tax write-off on my wrist, desperately pretending it's a crown. Anna stood up, smoothly brushing a microscopic speck of dust from the front of her sweater. She looked at the flustered, furious young woman with genuine, chilling apathy. "Enjoy the charity gala this weekend," Anna said softly. "I hear Anthony is wearing his custom Brioni suit. Make sure he checks his blind spots." Anna walked out of the cafe, the brass bell chiming her exit. She left Carly rooted to the spot, the psychological poison Anna had just administered beginning to work its way through the younger woman's meticulously curated confidence. The battle lines were no longer drawn on legal briefs and court dockets, they were drawn in the deepest insecurities of the mind. The main courtroom in the New York State Supreme Court building in Lower Manhattan was a cavernous, intimidating theater of dark mahogany, soaring vaulted ceilings, and an oppressive, heavy silence. It was architecturally designed to make the individual feel incredibly small, and the law feel utterly omnipotent. On the first day of Russell v. Russell, the gallery was packed beyond capacity. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax, nervous sweat, and expensive cologne. Tech bloggers in hoodies, sharply dressed financial journalists from the Wall Street Journal, and high society vultures crowded the hard wooden benches. They were all eager to watch the highly anticipated public execution of the Silicon Valley Golden Boy's allegedly unstable, vengeful ex-wife. Anna sat at the defense table next to Patrick. She wore a beautifully tailored, charcoal black suit that belonged to another life, a piece of armor, from her days presenting to defense contractors. Her posture was immaculate, her spine perfectly straight, her hands resting calmly and visibly on the scarred wooden table. She looked less like a defendant facing financial ruin and more like a Supreme Court justice preparing to preside over her own trial. Across the wide aisle, Anthony was firmly in his element. He was radiating a polished, weaponized charisma, smiling warmly and deferentially at the jury box 12 ordinary citizens who were already visibly captivated by his effortless, boyish charm. Benjamin sat beside him, arranging his impeccably organized files, looking like a great white shark that had just smelled a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Judge Robert Harrison, a no-nonsense, gray-haired veteran of the bench who despised corporate grandstanding, struck his gavel, calling the murmuring room to order. "Mr. Benjamin, you may proceed with your opening statement," the judge rumbled, his voice echoing against the high walls. Benjamin stood, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket with a theatrical, practiced flourish. He walked confidently to the center of the room, standing just feet from the jury box, engaging them with a deeply sympathetic, mournful expression. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Benjamin began, his voice a rich, comforting baritone designed to inspire absolute trust. "This is fundamentally a case about a brilliant man, a visionary, and a tragic, devastating betrayal of the deepest trust imaginable. Anthony Russell built a company from the ground up that secures the future of our nation's defense systems. He built it with passion, with unparalleled vision, and with his wife, Anna, by his side." Benjamin paused, letting his gaze fall heavily, almost pityingly, upon Anna. "But profound success is a heavy, isolating burden," Benjamin continued, his tone turning grave. "And as Russell Innovations soared to billion-dollar valuations, Miss Patel found herself unable to keep up with the rigorous demands of the enterprise. We will show you incontrovertible evidence, stark server logs, sworn affidavits, and painful testimony from her own engineering colleagues that Miss Patel, fueled by deep professional jealousy and a toxic marital paranoia, intentionally injected malicious, recursive code into the company's flagship algorithm. She didn't just try to destroy a company because her marriage was failing. She tried to destroy her husband's life's work out of pure, unadulterated spite." Anthony looked down at his hands, playing the role of the heartbroken, reluctant genius to absolute perfection. The jury ate it up. Anna, maintaining her terrifying calm, watched the micro-expressions on the jurors' faces, the subtle nods of sympathy directed at Anthony, the hard, judgmental, narrowed glances thrown her way. Benjamin's narrative was taking deep root in their minds. When Patrick stood for his opening statement, the contrast was jarring. He didn't pace the floor. He didn't use grand, sweeping theatrical hand gestures. He stood firmly behind his podium, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, looking like a tired but honest public servant. "Mr. Benjamin is right about exactly one thing," Patrick said, his voice lacking Benjamin's slick polish, but carrying a raw, grounded sincerity that commanded a different kind of attention. "This is a case about a devastating betrayal. But the story Mr. Benjamin just told you is a beautifully constructed illusion. It is a very expensive, very well-rehearsed magic trick designed to distract you. Over the course of this trial, we are not going to ask you to pity Anna Patel. We are not going to ask for your sympathy. We are simply going to ask you to keep your eyes open and look behind the curtain." "Thank you." It was jarringly short. It was deeply ambiguous. Benjamin scoffed audibly, shaking his head. Anthony smirked, leaning back in his chair. They clearly thought Patrick had nothing, that the brevity was a sign of a completely empty hand. "The plaintiff calls Anthony Russell to the stand," Benjamin announced proudly. Anthony confidently strode to the witness box. He took the oath, his voice ringing clear and true across the silent courtroom. He sat down, looking like a man completely unbothered by the crushing weight of perjury. For the next 2 excruciating hours, Benjamin led Anthony through a masterful, flawlessly choreographed direct examination. Anthony testified about his grand vision for the company, deliberately minimizing Anna's contributions to mere supportive coding. He spoke of his heartbreak over his failing marriage, citing Anna's growing distance and alleged erratic outbursts. He described, with a trembling voice, his absolute shock and horror when the security team brought him the server logs pointing directly to Anna's terminal on the night the DoD algorithm crashed. He painted himself as the ultimate victim of domestic corporate terrorism. He was eloquent, appropriately emotional, and utterly, terrifyingly convincing. "Mr. Russell," Benjamin asked gently, wrapping up the direct examination, leaning against the podium. "When you finally discovered that your wife, the woman you trusted above all others, was the definitive source of the sabotage that cost your company hundreds of millions of dollars, how did you feel in that moment?" Anthony looked directly at the jury, his eyes shining with carefully manufactured, perfectly timed unshed tears. "I felt like the entire foundation of my life had been ripped away. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the betrayal. I felt profound, indescribable grief. Thank you, Mr. Russell. I have nothing further, Your Honor." The courtroom let out a collective, sympathetic breath. In the gallery, the tech bloggers were already furiously typing on their laptops, drafting their sensational headlines declaring Anna Patel's definitive guilt. Judge Harrison looked down at the defense table, his expression neutral. "Mr. O'Connor. Your witness for cross-examination." Patrick stood up slowly. He picked up a single manila folder surprisingly, almost comically thin compared to the mountainous boxes of discovery Benjamin had wheeled into the room. He glanced down at Anna. Anna Patel didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply offered Patrick a microscopic, imperceptible nod. The ghost she had planted in the machine was finally ready to execute its fatal command. "Thank you, Your Honor," Patrick said, walking slowly toward the witness box where Anthony sat, wearing his impending victory like a golden crown. The courtroom went dead silent. Patrick O'Connor approached the witness stand with a slow, deliberate plod, carrying nothing but a standard yellow legal pad and a thin manila folder. He stopped a respectful distance from the box, adjusting his slightly smudged glasses. Anthony Russell sat comfortably, exuding the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in the room. He looked at Patrick with a patronizing smile. "Mr. Russell," Patrick began, his voice sharp and clear. "You testified that you are the visionary of Russell Innovations. Would it be fair to say, then, that your day-to-day involvement with the actual coding is minimal?" "That is correct," Anthony replied smoothly. "Anna handled the machinery, I handled the empire. I don't write syntax." "I see," Patrick noted. "Let's discuss that machinery." The night the beta test failed, the fatal code was injected at exactly 11:42 p.m. from Miss Patel's terminal. But as we established, she was in Chicago. Patrick pulled a schematic from his folder and placed it on the projector. "According to your security protocols, only 2 people had biometric clearance to bypass the retinal scanner on her door outside of business hours, Miss Patel, and you. Furthermore, your own expert testified the terminal was air-gapped from remote overrides. It required physical, manual input on that specific keyboard. Anthony's patronizing smile faltered, his eyes hardening. The surveillance shows no one entered the room, Mr. O'Connor. Perhaps Anna left her door propped open. I cannot speak to the exact mechanics of her sabotage. Patrick stopped pacing. He looked down at Anna, who simply blinked a slow, deliberate closure of her dark eyes. It was time. You cannot speak to the mechanics, Patrick echoed softly, picking up a small, black USB drive from his table, because you don't understand them. This, Your Honor, is the variable Mr. Russell failed to account for. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted violently. Benjamin lunged toward the bench, demanding the unvetted drive be struck from evidence, but Judge Harrison shut him down. Patrick had legally buried it deep within the supplemental financial disclosures Benjamin's own team had demanded. Mr. Russell, Patrick said, plugging the drive into the courtroom's central terminal. Because you aren't a programmer, you missed Protocol 4A. It's an offline, physical redundancy backup that mirrors every server anomaly, a drive that cannot be scrubbed remotely. The screens shifted to a waterfall of raw code and timestamped logs. At 11:20 p.m., the physical door to Miss Patel's office was opened, Patrick stated, his voice echoing in the absolute stillness. According to these unscrubbed logs, the retinal scan belonged to you. And at exactly 11:42 p.m., the minute the malicious code was injected, the central servers temporarily dropped their firewalls to execute an emergency data dump. Patrick split the screen, revealing a redacted bank transfer. In that exact 6-second window, a wire transfer of $300 million was initiated from Russell Innovations to an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands called Apex Ventures. In the gallery, Carly gasped loudly. She looked down at the heavy sapphire tennis bracelet on her wrist bought by Apex Ventures. The color completely drained from her face. Anthony's eyes darted frantically before landing on the defense table. Anna Patel sat perfectly still, but her impenetrable mask finally slipped, replaced by a cold, terrifying smile of absolute victory. You crashed your own company to hide a massive embezzlement scheme, Patrick delivered the crushing blow, and you framed your wife to secure the stolen capital. That's a lie, Anthony whispered, his booming charisma disintegrating into a reedy, panicked whisper. But no one believed him. Benjamin buried his face in his hands. The judge stared in open disgust. Patrick turned off the projector and sat down next to Anna. The courtroom went completely, suffocatingly silent. It was the terrifying sound of an empire collapsing into dust. The silence in the courtroom did not last, but the destruction it left in its wake was absolute and permanent. The immediate legal fallout was swift and violently decisive. Judge Harrison didn't just dismiss the divorce fault clause, he ordered the bailiffs to detain Anthony Russell before he could even step out of the witness box, citing extreme flight risk and immediate suspicion of grand larceny, federal wire fraud, and aggravated perjury. The mighty Benjamin, recognizing that he had been manipulated into facilitating a massive financial crime, immediately dropped Anthony as a client, desperate to save his own law firm from federal indictment. Carly, realizing she was heavily implicated via the gifts purchased with embezzled funds, fled the courthouse before the afternoon recess, leaving the sapphire bracelet sitting on a bathroom counter. She would sign a full immunity deal with federal prosecutors 48 hours later, testifying to everything Anthony had ever whispered to her in the dark. 6 months later, the violent storm had finally passed, leaving a radically altered landscape in its wake. It was a crisp, clear Tuesday morning in September. The air in the penthouse suite of the Russell Innovation skyscraper was cool and artificially purified, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive glass cleaner. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, unobstructed view of the Manhattan skyline, a kingdom of steel and ambition. Anna Patel stood by the glass, holding a warm cup of Earl Grey tea. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, the fabric moving with quiet, understated power. The door to the executive office chimed open softly. Molly walked in, carrying an encrypted tablet. She was no longer hiding in oversized puffer jackets in freezing botanical gardens. She stood tall, her eyes bright, fully inhabiting her new role as the Chief Technology Officer of the newly rebranded Patel O'Connor Systems. The board just voted unanimously, Anna, Molly said, a bright, genuine smile breaking across her face. The restructuring is complete. With Anthony's equity seized and legally transferred to you as restitution for the damages, you now hold a supermajority of 72%. You aren't just the CEO. You own the building. Anna took a slow sip of her tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. And the new defense algorithm? Patrick finalized the contracts with the DoD this morning, Molly confirmed, tapping the screen. They were thrilled to hear the anomalies were entirely human error, not architectural. We go live next week. Oh, and Patrick says he's taking us to lunch to celebrate his new corner office. Anna smiled, a genuine, soft expression that reached her dark eyes. Tell Patrick I am buying. He's earned it. Molly nodded, hesitating for a moment before turning to leave. Anna? I wanted to say thank you. Not just for the promotion, or the health plan for my brother, but for showing me that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to win. The loudest people in the room are usually trying to convince themselves they belong there, Molly, Anna said gently. The quiet ones are the ones writing the code. Molly smiled widely and exited the office, the heavy glass door sealing shut with a satisfying, decisive click. Anna turned back to the window, looking out over the city that had, only months ago, threatened to swallow her whole. Anthony was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, facing 30 years for defrauding investors and the government. His charismatic veneer had entirely disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a small, terrified man who finally understood that he had always been merely a parasite feeding on her genius. The psychological war was over. The deep, agonizing betrayal that had once threatened to crush her lungs had been metabolized. She hadn't just survived the fire Anthony had set to burn her life down, she had stood calmly in the flames, mapped the exit, and emerged completely untouched. She walked over to the massive mahogany desk that used to belong to her husband. She ran her hand over the polished wood, feeling no residual ghosts, no lingering pain. She sat down in the high-backed leather chair, opened her laptop, and began to type. There were new systems to build, new architectures to design, and an entire empire to run. And for the first time in a decade, the only voice in the room was her own. Silence is not an admission of defeat, it is the blank canvas upon which the most masterful victories are finally painted. Anna Patel walked away from the smoking rubble of her past not with bitter vengeance in her heart, but with the profound peace of a woman who always knew her own immeasurable worth. She proved that true power doesn't scream for attention, it quietly waits, it calculates, and it strikes when the truth becomes completely undeniable. Betrayal may build temporary, fragile empires, but absolute integrity builds unshakable foundations. Thank you so much for reading this thrilling journey of resilience and justice. If Anna's story resonated with you, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe for more epic tales.